Good morning. I think everyone can hear me okay. I'll sit slightly forward. Just a few domestics, if I may. The meeting is actually being webcast, so the committee, please, will follow the seating plan that you now have, so that everyone can see your good side, and we know who's saying what and who's voting which way. We move on to item 1, which is apologies, which I understand no apologies have been received.
Yep, none received.
Excellent. We circulated the minutes of the last meeting of this committee, which then was going under the heading of Environment and Infrastructure Select Committee. Have you all received that? And are there any amendments to those minutes, please? Steve. 10th of May. Yeah, thank you. So, all those, any objections to us agreeing those minutes? Okay, thank you. I will sign those later on if I may. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Fine. Just one small thing. Which won't be a small thing if the alarms do go off, but there are no planned fire alarms today. So if the fire alarm does sound off, please leave the Ashcombe room from the exit of the rear, go down the stairs and leave the building. And I would suggest assembling across the road, because being a retired firefighter, assembling in the car park's not a very good idea. So just follow me, in other words. Thank you. Item 4, which will be questions and petitions.
None received.
And any responses. Item 5, responses from questions referred to the Cabinet.
And none received again.
Excellent. Thank you. And we now come on to item 6, which is to welcome Paul O'Neill and Bob Pickles to our group. This is a new subject for our Select Committee, which is now Highways and Growth Select Committee. We are looking at really the performance of Surrey and how we've grown businesses and how the businesses are performing and how attractive Surrey might be. So the purpose is actually to talk with people like yourself to see what you see as attractive to get you to be in Surrey, and what we could do as a group to actually make Surrey a very attractive place. So, welcome to you both. I've got a question, and that is, how is the Employment Skills Board planning to improve and expand on relations with businesses? And what could be realistically done to actually, within the current resource, to improve visibility? Yeah. So that's one question, but I didn't know, a good point John raised is there anything you want to say to us before we start? Because it might save me asking you lots of questions. and it might cut a lot of meat out of here and go straight to the cakes at the back. So, thank
you. Well, good morning. Both Bob and I are very pleased to be here this morning and to discuss the work that we've been doing and the future of that as well. So my name is Paul O'Neill and I'm the Skills for Business Relationship Manager for Surrey County Council. I work in the Economic Growth team. And I report directly into a body called the Surrey Employment and Skills Board, which was established in 2013 by Surrey County Council. It's the voice of business for skills issues impacting productivity and growth within both private and public sector employers. I started working at Surrey County Council in February. And my work primarily has been to do with the apprenticeship levy and talking to businesses about their experiences of the apprenticeship levy, both the value that it's creating for businesses, but also the kind of some of the challenges that businesses are facing with the levy. The report that we've put together is a business or employer-led report and has come up with a number of solutions that we've talked to the local government association about, and they're very kind of keen to work with us. So I think that's a real positive step for this work. And we very much welcome this morning to have your kind of comments and feedback on that report that you've seen. I'd like to introduce Bob Pickles, who is the chair of the Employment and Skills Board, but he also works for Canon UK in Reigate. So I think I'll let Bob describe a bit more about the Employment and Skills Board and our work.
Thanks, Paula. Good morning, everybody. Just to endorse Paula's comment, we're delighted to have the opportunity to sit before you today. Thank you. We are a very energetic group, but because most of us, with the exception of Paula, are volunteers, there's a limit to the resources that are available to us. So it's great to have this opportunity, and thank you. As Paula said, I work for Canon. Canon are a global technology organisation with their UK headquarters in Reigate in Surrey. So we're very much a Surrey business. We employ about 700 people over there in Reigate, with about another 1,500 around the United Kingdom. So we're not an insignificant employer in the area, and we know that we have a significant impact on the local business community in Reigate and Banstead. We have very good relationships with the council over there as well, I'm delighted to say. Just on apprenticeships, I've helped and spearheaded a bit of work through Canon UK on, we're a significant apprenticeship levy payer, and we've completely transformed our business from having no apprentices 3 years ago. I think last month we recruited our 45th, and we're using apprenticeships and the levy that we're paying to government and claiming back from the Treasury to fund our learning and development programmes. And we found that to be an extremely powerful way of securing our future workforce. We, like many organisations, we may come on and talk about this later on, we have an ageing workforce. And catering to that ageing workforce and making sure that they're comfortable in what they do, but also attracting the young talent that we need for the future is a challenge many businesses face today. And the skills gaps that exist there are really significant. In my role as chair of the ESB, and I should just say I haven't been involved in it since the very beginning. 2013 was when David McNulty formed it. I came into the role of chair in 2 years ago, just nearly 2 years ago, so 2016. And one of the first things I realised was that if we were going to achieve anything, we needed to find some resource. So I started to work on that, and the result is that we now have Paula working for us and focusing entirely on the work of the Employment and Skills Board. I see my role, bearing in mind I'm just a volunteer and I have a full-time day job to complete for Canon, I see my role, though, as being very much the leading this group, giving it direction and chairing meetings effectively. Everybody else who's on this board is also a volunteer. So we have to make the most of the very short time that we have with them. 2 hours per quarter is the time we have with them officially. I'm quite good at persuading them to do other things outside of that, but we have to make those 2 hours incredibly efficient, and that's my job. But it's also my job to build the network of employers and also training providers across Surrey to ensure that we're not only recognising what skills gaps exist, but also finding the solution to those skills gaps through the training provision that's available. Obviously, the hope is that we'll provide a collective voice on all skills-based issues across the whole of Surrey. That's a fairly grand ambition from a bunch of amateurs, but it's what we're trying to do. One of the most important things about the board, and if you've seen the report, you'll have seen the list of members. One of the things I believe to be the most important is that the seniority of the members of that board is critical to it achieving anything. So the fact that we have the 11 boroughs of Surrey represented by 3 of the chief execs, the fact that the principals of the further education colleges, 3 out of the 4 in Surrey, are members of this board and attend regularly and energetically. The fact that we have the senior people from the local enterprise partnerships, both from Enterprise M3 and Coast to Capital. This is critical. And also, and one of the areas we struggle more in, is getting senior business leaders to engage with this. So I see that also as part of my role. I work in business, and I believe I have a good enough network to try to attract good people to it. And finally, the last thing I want to say is that the gap between public and private sector, for me, is too wide. I believe that there is much more that we could be doing. That this organisation that we're sitting in today in this amazing building is one of the biggest employers in Surrey. You face exactly the same employment and skills challenges that we face in Cannon in Reigate. We should be talking more about that. And for me, the ESB is the perfect vehicle to enable that to happen. Surrey County Council, I'm really delighted to say, have been fabulously supportive of me in this role and of the board in general. And indeed, that's how we've managed to have Paula working for us and providing some of the excellent resource and some of the reporting that you've seen in the document that you had before we started today. So that's probably enough from me. We're happy to take questions on anything that you wish to talk about that this subject covers, and we'll hope to give you the best answer we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Before we've got one person that wants to ask a question. You mentioned the gap between public and private sector is quite wide. Why do you think that is?
I think what I probably said was it's wider than it needs to be, but it's. I think it's a culture difference. Working in the private sector has a slightly different focus to it, a slightly different edge to it, and any of you that have worked in the private sector will recognise what I'm talking about. I think that increasingly public service provision has exactly the same sort of edge to it, but that's only a very recent development. So I still think there's a gap of understanding, probably, and culture between the two. If I may give a quick example, we tried to engage with the local school near our office, and the school didn't respond very quickly, and we thought they probably weren't interesting. Paradoxically, at the same time, they were trying to contact us to say, you're a local employer, what would you like to do? And they were going through our switchboard and not finding the connection. There's a mismatch, and I think we need to, one of the things that we can do through this vehicle, the Employment and Skills Board, is to develop that and try to work on it and make people feel more comfortable about it, finding ways through those culture differences. That's what I meant, really.
I think it's fair to say that the public sector is seen to be not as commercial as the private sector, but they are actually coming around and waking up to the realisation that they've actually got to be more commercial. Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that presentation. Very interesting. Bob kind of stole my thunder on one of my questions. I've got two questions, although I think that the engagement obviously very, very important, and I realise that most of you are volunteers, so that can be difficult because it's quite resource intensive. Perhaps one suggestion might be, which will come as no surprise to some of my colleagues here, that perhaps a digital route might, particularly with schools and those types of organisations, engage with them at a level they're comfortable engaging with, and you never know, they might respond. So that would be one suggestion. My other question is around representatives on your board. I don't see any disability organisations represented there. And I know through some of the work that I do at the Borough Council that actually the disability or people with impairments and disabilities have a lot to offer. And it's a real untapped sector, I would say. Is there anything you can do to engage that sector and perhaps even have somebody from that sector represented on your board? And if you can't find anyone, I can recommend someone to you.
That's a great suggestion. In fact, both great suggestions. The digital option, of course, is if we want to attract young people, then certainly we have to go that way. We do have a website. It's run under the rules of the Surrey County Council web presence, and getting change in that section is tricky and takes time. But you're absolutely right, we need to engage in a different way. The question on disability is a really positive and interesting one for me. I'm a trustee at an organisation called Disability Challengers in Guildford. I live in Guildford, I should have said that at the beginning. An organisation which provides care, but more importantly respite for children and families with multiple and severe disabilities. So I completely understand your question. One of our challenges in running this board is that it already has a large number of members. All of them are senior people from large organisations that daily face the challenges of supporting employees with disabilities. So I don't feel it's unrepresented, but I think your point is well made, that if we could find the right person to sit on that board and provide that steer, then I would have no objection to that. But I don't think it's quite right to say it's completely unrepresented. It's just perhaps underrepresented. Is that?
I'd love to introduce you to somebody. I'll get your card. If you feel it appropriate, get in touch with them, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you.
I'd be delighted to have that conversation with them. Yeah, it's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Richard. Oh, did you? Yes. Yeah. Your name's Richard. Yeah. Only Shirley at weekends.
Right. Hello. Good morning. First of all, Bob, I want to make a thanks to you and all the other members of your board, particularly all the volunteers for the work you do and what you do. Because as a volunteer, that's something very significant. And thank you very much, because you have enough pressures and a busy enough life as it is as commercial directors and managers, and you're giving some of your time forward to it. And Paula, I wasn't certain, are you a volunteer as well, or are you a paid employee of an organisation? And I think maybe Surrey, is that right?
Yes, no, I work 4 days for Surrey.
Right, okay, fine, thank you. Obviously my thanks to you, but it's a different thanks when you're talking about volunteers. I also then want to say, kind of how keen I am on apprenticeships and skills training, which is not necessarily just the academic qualifications up, but skills across the board. And apprenticeships I'm very keen on. You know that Surrey, and I've always strongly supported the apprenticeship skills. So again, that's an excellent way to continue to go forward. Just a couple of little concerns over the structure of your organisation. I've worked in commercial business all of my life, but in very relatively small companies, which actually is the majority of where most people work. And in a sense, it is sad, and I don't quite know how you can get around it, but you had the Federation of Small Businesses, Brian Wood's one man, and then the rest of the organisation tends to reflect the larger company situation. So, again, thought about how small businesses and how one can help and support them in any way, I think is an area that you need to keep on doing, because that's more and more. And things like the retail trade in the shops and our high street, which has been severely hit, they need support as much as possible, and how we can help them. And again, it's what you're saying to government to kind of make things easier, or to switch it so that they can do it. Then I noticed that the Surrey head teachers, that you're seeking a member, and the NHS social care. And, again, picking up on a comment from the chairman, is that it's very sad that, in a sense, these are government-run operations, or they are not the commercial sector, but the state, for want of another word for it, is that they're not involved. In other words, there's no one that has got time to come to your board to do that. And I can appreciate that the head teachers are very busy people, but maybe there could be someone else from education. You've got the colleges there, but again, what we teach in the schools is directly affecting the skills and what we're trying to put forward. And it's very sad. I would have thought maybe the NHS is the biggest employer in the area. one operation, which again is not represented, which again is unfortunate. And then the other question I had for you is, what cost to Surrey is your Employment Skills Board costing? And that includes staff members like Paula and other support. So just to give me an idea of what value for money and cost is for your board. Thank you.
Thank you. Just picking up on a point that you raised, we do have other select committees and scrutiny committees, and in fact the Adults and Lifelong Learning actually made a recommendation of enhancing the reputation of apprenticeship schemes in Surrey, and I wonder whether or not you could give some thoughts as to how that might be able to be achieved, because I, like you, I think we need to be growing some of our own talent in the area. The other question I'd like to raise, and something I thought for some time, we've got two ends of the spectrum. We've got the youngsters leaving school, looking for apprenticeships, and then we have people in their 50s and upwards who, for reasons beyond their control, are made redundant, or the firm closes down and they relocate or whatever, but they're unemployed. And I've always thought that there should be something that should be developed to harness those skills to try and bring the apprenticeships closer to the people that are in their 50s that have got the skills, so one can learn from the other. But maybe to have some small start-up businesses, maybe, and I mentioned earlier on, maybe a hub somewhere, that these people that are unemployed, that when they go for interviews, they are told that there are people with more skills closer to the business's needs, but actually it turns out, whichever way you like to cut it, is because of their age and they're expensive. And I just think that we could actually get them to start up some businesses, use their skills, and bring some apprenticeships in there. It could be a commonality of an embryo network of businesses in that area that we could grow, and it's something that I've been talking about for a long time. So I welcome your thoughts on those. We also have, I don't know whether you want to answer some of those questions that are raised now before you lose that thread, and then we go on to the rest, if we may. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Richard, if I could come to your points. Small and medium-sized businesses are the largest employers, not only in this area, but in all areas in the country. I think around here it's in the high 80% of employees work in small to medium-sized businesses, and mainly small. So we understand completely the requirement for us to reflect that. And that's why we asked the Federation of Small Businesses to have representation on that board. Brian represents all small businesses that are his members across the whole of the South East region, not just Surrey. Of course, it would be lovely to have small businesses represented individually. The challenge for us is that I can't just let the board turn into 100 people. And the challenge for them is that they don't have people employed like me in a large organisation who is prepared and willing and released by his employer to spend time on these sorts of issues. We do visit them regularly, we talk to them, and through people like Brian at the Federation of Small Businesses and Louise Punter, who is the Chief Exec of the Surrey Chambers of Commerce, who's also a member of this board and attends regularly, and also through a representation of the Institute of Directors, who also attend this board regularly, we try to reach out to businesses of all shapes and sizes in the best way that we feel that we can. Your point's well made, though, that there isn't anybody sitting on there who is a sort of employs two people and works in a shed at the back of the garage. You're absolutely right. What we must try to do is to represent that group, and we will continue to try to do that. And any suggestions you've got about how we could better do it, I'd be very grateful to receive, because we know it's a challenge. Absolutely. I also just wanted to come back to you, ask questions about schools and the NHS being represented. And you'll have seen from our report we've already identified that's a gap. We've approached a number of people in the NHS over the last 12 months and unfortunately haven't had any success in attracting anybody to come and spend time on this. We'll keep going. And again, if you have any suggestions or any knowledge of anybody in the NHS that you think at a senior level that would be useful for us to have connections with, that will be incredibly useful. We used to have a representation from schools. The head teacher from the, I'm going to try and remember the name of the school, begins with a K, before Paula's time. The head teacher, I think is it Nivet School or something? I can't remember. It's one of the schools. She was a representation on the board, but she had to leave, and we've been trying to replace her. And I have a meeting set up with the head teacher at Blenheim School in Epsom in a couple of weeks' time. So we'll keep going, and we know we have to fill those gaps. But you're right to flag them up. If I may, I'll come back to you on the actual cost, because I don't have that number prepared for you today. I mean, we could tell you what the cost of Paula was, but clearly there are some indirect costs, because the department, the economic growth team in Surrey County Council support the board in a number of ways, not just through Paula. So if I may, I'll come back to you and report back through Richard Plummer on what that number is, so that we can get that back to you.
I think it's very probably a number which is very acceptable to the work that you do, but it's important that we identify it, because I'm sorry to say at the moment we're identifying every number there is.
I'd expect nothing less, absolutely.
Can I come here? Possibly not so much. I'm looking for maybe what return on investment we're seeing there, because you do have to spend to speculate and grow, so perhaps a return on investment. You wanted to raise a point on that?
Just very quickly, Chairman, just based on something you just said there, I think that, that you're embedded quite well already into Surrey County Council, and that we are the education authority. Must be a way of you engaging, even if it's the cabinet member, to try and get some inroads into those areas. I don't know if you've already answered. Forgive me if I'm teaching you how to suck eggs, but surely there must be opportunities within this building just to engage schools. And I'm sure every member here is already plugged into the schools in their areas. I can introduce you to every school in my area, every secondary school. There's 3 in my area. No problem at all, and I'm sure they'd love to see you. I know Tomlinscote School would. They do a jobs fair every year. No problem at all.
I mean, if I come back on that, you mentioned, I think Bob mentioned the question about how we enhance apprenticeships within Surrey, and obviously the links with schools is incredibly powerful and is the root of that. There are some really interesting things that are going on nationally, which are filtering down and affecting how schools are engaging with businesses through the government initiative called the Gatsby benchmarks that some of you may or may not be aware of, but they're basically through the careers strategy to enhance career advice and guidance for schools. The 8 benchmarks represent, I suppose, best practice for schools to accomplish really good careers guidance within our schools. And that really is having an effect, I think, and will continue to have an effect. It's early stages. It's only been going since January this year. But as of September this year, every school has to have a careers leader. That leader may have multiple hats, I imagine, within schools, but there is somebody representing careers within every secondary school in the county. In addition to that, we're working very closely with the local enterprise partnerships and their skills strategies within their strategic economic plans, and going forward will have effect on that. And some of the things they're doing locally is that every school, the objective is that every school has a volunteer, another volunteer, but a volunteer from the business community who acts as an enterprise advisor, working with the management and the careers advisors within each of the schools. So schools are beginning to realise they're having to be measured in some respects with these Gatsby benchmarks on careers, which is a good step forward. and it is making schools realise that they are having to kind of look to businesses within their communities for support and help. And I think schools, businesses within our communities as well, those small businesses as well as the large businesses, generally have goodwill to kind of not only give back to their community but also to teach and inspire the young, because they're looking for new recruits, or they will be looking for new recruits. The world is changing, and businesses know that. And there's no better way than to kind of inspire from the ground up, I think. So yes. And in addition to that, one of the things I'm doing within Surrey and within the County Council is I'm part of a newly formed, as of about a week ago, task force to look at our own internal apprenticeship system as well. And it was mentioned before how much the public sector and private sector can learn from one another, and I think the lessons that we've learned from the Employment and Skills Board really will kind of impact on kind of that knowledge. And if we can bring business knowledge into what we're doing within the County Council, and knowing kind of how others have done it and succeeded, or the challenges that businesses are having which are similar to ours, I think that working relationship could really be quite powerful.
Thank you, Paula. Peter.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation, and also for the material we were sent. It was very educational for me, particularly reading the apprenticeship levy and the debugging the apprenticeship levy document that you, I think, put together. I've got a couple of questions, really, and I'm relatively new to this. I come from the private sector until relatively recently. In the apprenticeship levy area, you show the data that shows nationally the number of apprenticeship starts actually dropped from 2016-17 to 2017-18. I was kind of surprised to see that, because it seems to be going in the wrong direction, given something new's been implemented. Although when I read your debugging section, I see there are plenty of bugs in there, most of which are, it seemed to me the suggestions that you were making were absolutely, really, quite frankly, blindingly obvious that they should have been implemented from the start. So I wondered if you had a reason why they were dropping. And secondly, I was curious to know if you had the numbers, those are national numbers, if you had the numbers for Surrey, because I think that would be interesting to know in terms of what's happening there. So those were my questions.
In terms of since 2017, when the apprenticeship levy was introduced, yes, the numbers of apprenticeships have dramatically dropped. I think this is a bit of a learning curve. It's a big learning curve for organisations, not just those who are new to apprenticeships, but those who have been doing apprenticeships for 25 years plus are still challenged by the new changes to the apprenticeship levy. So I think it was a natural thing to happen because of the learning curve for businesses. There's a lot of work that needs to go on, and it has changed things in terms of the responsibilities that employers have now, in terms of gathering evidence and making sure that the apprenticeship levy has apprentice has is being monitored in a particular way. So there's a lot of new kind of things that employers have to do. As you can see from the report, there are factors that are inhibiting people using their levy. One of the big things is that since the apprenticeship levy was introduced, they've also introduced they're calling them standards. You might think of them as courses. So the courses are changing. They're called standards now, and they're being designed by businesses, which is a fantastic opportunity to make sure that the courses or the standards are relevant to the employers and the needs that they have. But it is taking time, and there are standards that aren't ready, and standards are still not ready. For example, social work from a county council perspective is still not available for a kind of a degree apprenticeship in social work. So it is stopping people spend their money. It's stopping people or employers using apprenticeships, and that's part of the reason. In terms of Surrey's figures, to be honest, there is data out there, but it's just mining it. And I'd love to find those figures, and that's something on my agenda that I want to do. So again, maybe it's something we can come back to you with the data.
On your debugging document, do you have any insight or expectation that those suggestions that you make are going to be implemented?
I'd hope so. But we had a great meeting with Lord Porter at the LGA, and our recommendations very much kind of are in line with what they're considering. So, for example, extending the time period before your money disappears is on. If is a common generic across the country, a wide request. Whether it happens is another means. We've been trying to, and we are very kind of active in terms of talking to other government ministers, and I think that's a way, working with the LGA, we can work together and hopefully get in front of those who make the decisions.
Bob.
Thank you, Chair. And just to follow that up, Paula should take all the credit for this report. She's done a fantastic job in putting together something which is totally specific to some employers in Surrey, a group of employers in Surrey. That's what Lord Porter and the people at the LGA really liked. It wasn't just because, by the way, the CBI, the British Chambers of Commerce have all said similar things, but to have some real live, tangible evidence of specific employers in an area like Surrey is really valuable to them. And Paula should take all the credit for that report. She's done a fantastic job on it. The other thing to say is that we're not just leaving it there. There is an event that Paula has already got in the diary in November where she's inviting all of those employers, one of whom is the wonderful McLaren in Woking. And that's where the meeting is going to be held, where we're going to dig a bit deeper into this subject and try to find out a bit more about, well, so why are we seeing fewer apprentices really? Yes, we know it's complicated, this new system, and we know the standards aren't there yet, and we know that you have to spend your money in 2 years, and that's not really long enough for an organisation to shift the way it plans learning and development. But what else? So we want to get right underneath it. So this is being led by Paul, and it's a fantastic piece of really specific work about Surrey. I'm really proud of what she's done, so thank you for raising it and letting us have the opportunity to talk a bit more about it. Yes, exactly. And while I'm speaking, Chair, may I just come back? You asked a question earlier about later life and apprentices. One of the aspects of the apprenticeship levy is that it removed the cap of age, which used to be 25, for people to attend an apprenticeship programme. That now has been removed completely, and you can take an apprenticeship at any age. So I don't know whether that was something you were aware of, but...
A very short one, because we've got quite a build-up of questions. Yeah, by all means.
Say, I picked up, Paula, you saying something about a degree apprenticeship. And that worried me immediately. Because if you're putting academic excellence on your apprenticeships, I'm not surprised you're getting a reduced number, because apprenticeships was really designed for those who aren't necessarily quite so academically, but want to learn and do the job. And to be quite frank with you, I've done my job with minimal amount of academic qualifications and run my own business, and etc. So what worries me is apprenticeships should not be controlled by degrees or anything else, and that it is learning the job, not so much all the paper, the academic side, and that was the concern. That is that affecting you? And when you have your apprenticeships at 50, it's learning about the job and the life, not, my gosh, can you write out an essay and get to degree level? That's what I'm.
Thank you. Just one point as well to add to what you were talking about, Bob, is that I know the Cabinet member, John Fury, has actually formed a task group, and I'd like minuted that we will be asking him to actually to be looking at the levy process and streamlining the process, because it's fairly evident from the report that, you know, we've got this opportunity, but we're putting blockers in the process rather than trying to speed the process up. Stephen, I think you were next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. 3 questions, really. First one on the composition of the board. Clearly, the board is the composition is impressive, but the question is, how did you actually get these people together? And I'm curious about how you made the approach and how you actually got them together, particularly with regard to the business community and the education, the higher further education representatives. The second question relates to finance. I know we've talked about finance, but my understanding is that the largest contributor so far as finance is concerned is the County Council. I wondered if there are other contributors so far as finance is concerned, and not necessarily indicate who they are, but it'd be interesting to know what proportion of the finance comes from outside of the County Council. And the big question is, how secure is the County Council's funding during the course of the next year or so? I mean, do we have any assurance that will be available? And finally, do you have any new projects in mind? And if you do, it'd be interesting to know what they are.
Would you like to take
Okay,
that on
sorry,
board?
we were just deciding who would answer which point there. How did we get the group together? I can't take responsibility for all of that because it happened before I was involved. But the previous Chief Executive of Surrey County Council, David McNulty, was responsible for setting it up. I believe it was he that approached the senior people in the boroughs to support this activity, and he would have reached out to the education sector that are involved and also to businesses. I know that for the first couple of years this board was chaired by somebody from BP over in Sunbury, so I know that may have been through a connection that he had there. So his support for this board, and since her arrival, Joanna Killian's support for it has been significant in ensuring that we attract the right level of people to it. As far as businesses are concerned, I've used my personal network to attract people that I know are interested in this subject and who hold senior positions in small to medium and also large businesses in Surrey. So a lot of it's about personal connections. If I could make a quick comment about the finances, as far as I'm aware, there is no other money that changes hands from anywhere else other than the County Council. But if I may make the point, the volunteering looks like it's free, but it isn't. The contribution, I could do a calculation based on what all of those people are worth and tell you that for the minimum of 8 hours a year that they come and spend with us, that's what the contribution is. But that probably wouldn't be worth it. But my point is that it's, I think, as far as I'm aware, the only cash that changes hands is from the County Council. But may we come back, I previously suggested we'll come back and talk about what it actually costs. Maybe we can cover it in that answer when we come back on it, if that's okay. And we'll come back through Richard and the Chair on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, and then your third question, which I think Paula will answer.
In terms of new projects, and it relates to kind of finance, I think, as well, in terms of the contributions that the board make, is sometimes it's in terms of working with them on projects as well. So, for example, I'm going to be working with East Surrey College on a project looking at T-levels, and I know I've put a bit of detail about what T-levels are in the report. So that's where we get the contributions from East Surrey in terms of their hosting and their resource for this project. And the idea behind it is that we will work with businesses to understand some of the issues around the T-level implementation. And one of the big things for as we know from discussing with businesses, is they have to complete, every pupil has to complete a significant work placement. So on that project, we're going to be developing new models, sector-based models, for how businesses could implement longer periods of work placements for the age group of the T-levels, which will be from 16 to 18-year-olds plus. So that's one piece of work that we will be doing. Another project that is in development is, and again we're looking for finance to support this, and we have got one potential funder, so I can't say who it is at the moment because they haven't signed on the dotted line, but that's another way in which we're looking for other sources of funding to promote the work that the Employment and Skills Board can do. And that's all about progression to apprenticeships, and that would be working with schools, with businesses, and with pupils interested in applying for apprenticeships. And it's a way in which we can pilot fairly low cost, but pilot initiatives that we can test out the theory and the models, and then hopefully, if it's successful, iterate it and grow that kind of process throughout the county.
Thank you. And you wanted to add something, Bob?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I wanted just to go back to the funding question. Yes, we'll answer that as to what it's actually costing. But one of the things we must do is to pursue different funding from other organisations, and in particular the two local enterprise partnerships that cover Surrey. They are going to be running large skills-based programmes across their geographies, which include Surrey. And we need to be making sure that although Surrey isn't directly, it's directly represented at board level in both, we need to make sure that we are approaching them for any funding that's available to support skills in Surrey, because that's where much of the money will come from in the future. So it's very important, our relationship with those two organisations. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the frustrating things about going towards the end of the session is that all the good questions have been asked. So I'm struggling a bit, and particularly the ones from Peter and Stephen were the ones I was going to cover. And I think Bob has just, in a sense, touched on one of the issues I was going to raise, but perhaps he would, or he and Paula might elaborate, and that is the relationship between ESB and the LEPs. In Surrey, of course, we're not favoured because we have two LEPs, and that can either be a positive, but it's probably a negative in the sense that we can't. We may fall between two stools and not have a focus on Surrey per se. So a general question would be: how do you see the relation? What are the relationships with the two local enterprise partnerships, and how they could be developed and improved to improve the skills level in the counties? So that's a sort of more general question on the LEPs. And the second question is, again, without preempting what the forthcoming study and work that Paula outlined on the training, the T-levels will be. Reading the report, Surrey has pretty well full employment, but the requirement is for STEM, really quite well-focused skills that will be needed in growing technology. And the question is, and it may be an unfair question, is do you envisage, even if they work well, that T-levels will be a major contribution, a positive contribution to improving that skill set to provide the level of employment that Surrey employers, both public and private sector, so desperately need?
I'll take the first question first, the question about LEPs. Our relationship with the LEPs is, I think, very good. We have regular representation at our board meetings from both LEPs at a senior level, and in recent months, both LEPs are developing their strategic economic plans. You might have seen that Coast to Capital recently launched theirs. It's called Gatwick 360. I was at that launch, and we contributed significantly, as did Surrey County Council, to the consultation that went into that. It's important, I think, to say that both LEPs have approached us to ask us about how to set up an employment and skills board for their regions. I have two concerns about that. And two, what I see as two fantastic opportunities. The risks are that we're duplicating effort. And if this board already exists and is doing reasonably okay with what it's tasked with, why try and reinvent it somewhere else, would be my first question. So I think that's a risk. Duplication, and I would try to avoid that if I could. One way we can get around that is I've already agreed to sit on the Coast to Capital Employment and Skills Board as a Surrey representative, and providing that input that they require, and also the experience of having chaired a board like this for a couple of years. We expect to be asked to do the same thing by Enterprise M3. So I think the relationships are good. Paula and I recently met with both chief execs and are completely delighted with the way they've approached us. They've been very consultative, very considerate, and seem to be willing to say that they regard Surrey as an important part of their geography. I agree with you, though, that the fact that there are two very different organisations trying to represent our interests is the challenge. I also talked about two opportunities. The opportunities are for us to really contribute massively to what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, and we do. So we have a real opportunity to take a very much of a front foot on that. And the second is that the money that they're going to be attracting through their skills-based programmes, I believe if we're in there talking to them and have that relationship, that opportunity is for us to apply for that funding and look to provide the programmes that will enable them to draw that funding down so that we can see it coming. I mean, Surrey is only part of this, of course, but I suspect that at the moment their priorities, if you're Coast to Capital, it's more likely to be the South Coast than it is to be Surrey, who they see as being reasonably okay at the moment. Full employment, somebody mentioned earlier on. So I hope that's kind of given you some of the answers that you were looking for there. We'll continue to work with them. We know them well, and we think we can do more. That's the point, I suppose, yeah.
Thank you. Andy.
Sorry, I was going to answer your second question, which is about STEM. I've got a study by WISE this year showed that 7% of girls who take STEM GCSEs go on to qualify for a kind of degree starting point, as compared to 24% of boys. So, I mean, there's a big gender issue to do with STEM as well, not just STEM itself. And I think T-levels can go some way to do that. I think the important thing about T-levels is they're going to be phased subject areas, and obviously some of the STEM subjects are coming through in terms of digital, construction, engineering. And I think there is work to be done to kind of inspire young people into those careers and see the bigger picture, the kind of future picture of what exciting opportunities that can offer. And I think the best way, in some respects, to do that is through immersion. And immersion is through going, seeing, experiencing, whether that's virtual, in a virtual setting, or whether that's in the real-life setting, such as a work experience. And I don't think there's anything better than actually experiencing it. There's an organisation that the government kind of sit within the government, which is the Careers and Enterprise Company, which are doing fantastic work with the LEPs as well to kind of inspire schools in all sorts. And there's amazing charities locally, such as SATRO, which has a very kind of focus on STEM. And I think it's about kind of inspiring the young people and giving them the opportunities through different mechanisms. I don't think there's one method will solve it all. So I think T-levels will go a certain way, and I think T-levels definitely are going to be a challenge, but an opportunity for that sector.
Thank you. Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. Waverley Borough Council that I'm a member of has shown quite a strong commitment to helping young people in skills by setting up an organisation called Waverley Training Services. I'd just be interested to know if you're aware of this. I presume you probably are, and what links there are between your organisation and Waverley Training Service, and also whether other borough and district councils do similar things, and if they don't, whether they should be encouraged to do so. That's my first point and first question. Second question is really probably slightly outside, probably well outside your remit. But when I speak to business people, the thing that they're most concerned about is the problems of infrastructure in the borough, particularly things to do with transport and so on. Now, that's not your direct remit, obviously, but I'd just be interested to know if that has any impact on what you do and what the people you're working with try to do. If poor infrastructure, not insufficient infrastructure, comes up as an issue, and whether you can do anything to influence it. As I say, it's obviously not your remit, but I'd just be interested in your comments on it. Thank you.
In terms of Waverley Training Centre services, I'm connected with them, so we have conversations, so I'm very aware of what they do. And I've discussed, I had a conversation with them in terms of the work that I did with the apprenticeship levy as well. I think in terms of other districts and boroughs, I think other districts and boroughs are very beginning to be more active in the kind of skills way and the skills agenda. I'm personally not aware of any other district and borough with that facility. So that's from that perspective. In terms of the infrastructure question, I think if you're talking about young people and travel, that's an issue in terms of the cost, and less so about time maybe, but puts them off if they're having to travel long distances for whether it be work experience. That's one of the issues for the T levels. So if you are a young person and you're doing a T-level work placement for 45 to 60 days, where are those businesses? They're not going to be in central London because you won't be able to afford it. You need local businesses, and that's the challenge.
Briefly, Chairman.
Quickly.
Just a suggestion that you perhaps set up something where Waverley Training Service could be used as an example to other borough councils, because it seems to work extremely well in Waverley, and I think it could be used as a method to encourage other people if some session was setting up for other boroughs to see what Waverley Training Service have done and achieved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Just something you've sort of alluded to, and that is that you have a forward plan of projects, and I wonder whether or not you could share with us what you think that forward plan of projects will be and how it would impact in Surrey, and whether you could share your forward plan with the committee will be useful.
We'd be more than delighted to share the forward plan with you, yes, of course. Did you want us to describe it now?
Certainly, if you could supply that to us, we can circulate it amongst the members
Paula touched on some of the things that she's going to be getting up to, and I think we've committed in the report that we sent you to come back to you a year from now and report back on progress, and I think that's obviously very important that we do that. But if in the meantime it would be helpful to have a kind of a schedule of planned work that we think we're going to be getting involved in, we can provide that reasonably quickly, yeah, of course.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Bob and Paula. We're going to have a 5-minute break now so we can actually sum up our recommendations. Please feel free to help yourself to the cake shop that's at the back. And
thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. rather than me read them out, I'll let you read them. These are the recommendations that we have. The first one is, I think, that we would be asking the Cabinet member, who is the Deputy Leader, to take a very active part. He's not with us today, which is disappointing, and will be reflected, because I think, we've got 2 volunteers that have come into us, but he's gone off to another meeting. So I will be making my point to him. So they're the recommendations. Are you all in agreement with those? That shows the cakes are working, doesn't it? So thank you very much. We will now move on to the next item, which is highways, and we've got a whole bank of people. It will be. Not only are you recorded, but you're also webcast. So we do have a Cabinet member here on this one. Thank you, Colin, for turning up and realising it's an important item on our agenda. And thank you to Lucy, nothing wrong, Bernard and Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Wondered if you can talk to us about the highways contract.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, apologise for the drip feed of information. I was really keen that we got as much information to you as possible in advance, which is why you had the paper, and then the annex followed afterwards. So I apologise for the drip feed, but I was really keen to get as much to you that you can actually pre-read, because actually there's a lot of information, and the slides today will bring a lot as well. Introducing Lucy, I think you all know, heads up our Highways and Transport Department. Paul, you would have met before at the end, I'm sure. Basically does a lot of contract negotiation. He's got a big title there, which I can't read from here. Bernard, you probably wouldn't have met. He's General Manager for Kia. That he looks after the Surrey operation. Only been with us, joined us this year, I think. When is it? Wasn't it, Bird? November last year. It was a year now. Crikey. Bernard's been a breath of fresh air and someone we can communicate with. So really enjoying working with Bernard going forward. And I'm sure you'll have some questions for him later on. The object of the day is not to scrutinise the present contract, but to make recommendations about it. But what we wanted to do, and what was really keen to do, is give you a broader understanding of the complexities of the contract. Over the next 6 to 12 months, we will need your assistance in looking at how we shape the new contract that is due for renewal in 2021. So, can you think about your questions today, and not asking questions about the pothole at the bottom of your road, but actually asking questions that will help the committee understand and give them a better understanding of the work that is done within the contract and the work we need to do going forward. The next meeting we will be bringing you a performance dashboard. You'll get a view of that today in one of the presentation slides, but we can go into that in more detail, and at that point you can have a better conversation perhaps about where we're going at the moment. There's a lot of information to absorb today. Our aim going forward is to ask the committee to set up a task and finish group to work on the new contract with us, and for us to use as a sounding board. And obviously we will re-go over a lot of this information going forward to help the understanding, because I think the understanding is really why I wanted this item to come forward today. And I've worked with you, Chair, on bringing this, because I thought this was really important. Because what I've gained over the last 18 months in my portfolio role is an understanding of the complexities, and it is very, very complex. Not just the Kia contract, but all the contracts, and you'll see a bit of that in the presentation. I wanted to throw a bit of context just before we get on to the presentation and today's thing. You get what you pay for in life. The contract itself sets a repair criteria on defects. Defects in a year, we put at I think the average at the moment is, what was the number? About 14,000 per year. 40,000 per year. Last year, with the winter, it's probably closer to double that. And that doesn't cost Surrey any additional money. Kia, as part of the contract, put about 8 to 10 crews out on a normal period of time. On any one day, there's 8 to 10 crews out there on the road meeting this criteria. and that works in with the costs of the actual contract. Some of the staff that work on them repair contracts, because of the price around the contract, also do the winter gritting routes. So you may see a guy repairing a pothole one day and he'll be out doing the gritting routes another day. This is the way the contract is bought to get the best value for money out of what we get. Last winter was obviously an adverse one. Kia did step up to the plate, pulled in staff from other areas, and there was over 30 crews on the road to bring that back into contact. We constantly push back on the service, but we must be mindful. We could have a larger workforce, we could have a better service, but we've got to pay for it. We could repair more roads, they could be in a nicer condition so you don't need the potholes, but it needs to be paid for. You get what you paid for. So the fabric of the contract is built around a cost base that we need to be putting into the contract. As part of the putting together of the contract, value for money was looked at. It was put against other areas to make sure we're getting good value for money. That was all back in time. But actually, so that was all worked on. And over the time, Kia have been worked with us to adapt the contract, and you'll get some of that today as well, to actually bring that forward to get better value for money out of it. So the presentation will give us a bit more information about that. Bob, you're waving your finger at me.
I'm waving my finger because I'm looking at the screen, and I'm looking at this screen and want to make sure that we're getting the contract.
You've got half a screen behind you, I have to say.
Yes. So, Kevin at the back, I don't know whether you can work any magic on trying to get us... it might be the size of the screen or the presentation.
We'll look at what that is, the presentation, so it will be all wrong when we get there.
Anyway, okay. Sorry, Colin.
That's all right, no problem at all. But that sort of covers what I wanted to say. I just wanted to put some context and some background around it, and then we'll go through. We'll ask for questions at the end of the presentation because there's quite a bit to get through, and some of the questions may be answered as we go through, so make a note of your questions, and then we'll do some questions at the end.
So I'll start if I may. So can everybody see a screen that kind of captures enough? Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. So we have quite a number of contracts delivering our highways activities. What we're focusing on today is the activities that are delivered through the Kia contract. It's what we kind of call our core maintenance contract. So this one was let in 2011 for a maximum of 10 years, and over that period of time we have gone through 2 extension activities, which means that the current Kia contract will end in 2021, and both of those extensions are kind of linked to improvement plans and developments of plans to see the contract through for the rest of the term. When we initially let this contract, it was at a value of about 10 to 15 million, and that's grown actually over those years as we've kind of increased our capital budgets and other bits and pieces. So the turnover is quite substantially more now, and that kind of indicates how the delivery has changed and what we're doing each year. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So as I said, this is only one of a number of our contracts, but it actually covers quite a lot of our what we call statutory functions, our core maintenance service. So there's things like safety defects, which you'll recognise there, winter maintenance, also does quite a lot of our capital works in terms of resurfacing, footway works and structures and drainage stuff. So it covers a broad activity. I would stress here that we're dealing with quite a lot of volume, as Colin kind of alluded to earlier. There's a lot of volume work going through here. And we make use of the workforce across the contract to be able to deliver some of our activities. So, for example, staff that are working on safety defects or other works also would become our winter gritter drivers. So it gives us some resilience in that aspect. If we move on to the next slide, what you'll see, as I'm trying to demonstrate here, is there is a lot of volume of activities we do here, and we appreciate as well it's a very high profile service for lots of our residents, so we have to manage that. So we have to make sure we've got processes in place to make sure we're delivering what we need to deliver, and also that we're monitoring it. So there's quite a big focus on contract performance, which you'll hear a bit more about as we go through. So to give you some idea here, this is the last year's data, and there's a mixture of kind of some volume here, about 83,000 defects, which was extraordinary this year given the severe weather. substantial miles of resurfacing that we've done. We also have about 4,000 emergency call-outs we have to deal with. So these are volume figures which, as I've said, we need to make sure we can manage, handle and deliver a good service for everybody. If we go on to the next slide, we are perhaps drawing out here, thank you, a particular area which is obviously a high-profile one. This is what we call our safety defect service. And there's two elements to this. The one on the left, I've deliberately highlighted in red. It's very reactive. We have here a duty to keep the network safe for users. So we need to do that by carrying out repairs, obviously. And the key thing here in doing that is about managing risk to users and also our workforce on the network, but also the liabilities that are involved. So both Surrey have some liability here for making sure we are delivering what we need to do, and Kier have some liability here for making sure what they do is the right thing and will last. So compliance to our policy is very important for both of us. We have to do that to make sure we are protecting users from that risk, and also that we are protecting ourselves from our liabilities. Now, some of the challenges here, as we've talked about, it's a big volume business, this one particularly. Not every defect can be repaired on the network. Now, we know this causes some angst for residents in that we can turn up and only repair some defects and leave others. This is about managing risk. So where we know we've got risk, we are attending to deal with that risk. If we were to deal with every defect, we would need far greater resource capacity and budget capacity than we currently have, and we would be stretching into kind of the what would be deemed kind of not a reasonable approach, if you like, because the volume to expand the current practice would be significant. We do lots of monitoring in this area, so we have dedicated teams who are looking at the defects. We ask our contractor to do that as well, so they take before and after photos of every defect. So there's lots of monitoring goes on here, because it's really important. As I said, it's so linked to the risk and liability. We pay a lot of attention to it. These defects are identified by safety inspections, which are routine, and also we have public reported defects, as I hope you are aware. And it's very important to us that we take a right first time approach to this service, so we expect the contractor to turn up and repair the defect at the first go with a permanent repair and a saw cut patch repair, rather than just putting some tarmac or bitumen in the hole. And actually we have a good track record of this. So only about at the last time we looked at it, about 10% of the repairs were temporary. Because of reasons around traffic management, there are some occasions where it's unavoidable. But we appreciate that right first time approach is what our residents expect us to do, and we don't want to waste time going backwards and forwards, or also risk those temporary repairs failing. The other part of the service is more preventative, and I'll ask Bernard to just give you an overview of that.
Before Bernard comes in, Chair, if I may just come in on that point, but to measure against that, we must look at the risk. So where there, like the instance we had over the winter, where there are time constraints and we actually need to mitigate risk on a lot more potholes, turn up and do a temporary repair, you could probably do 40 to 50 of those in a day, where actually doing a cut-out and repair, you can do 20 in a day or 15 in a day. So actually, at some point where the volume gets larger, the temporary is needed to mitigate the risk, and that's why you see that temporary repair. But again, that's not at a cost to the county. That is a clear decision to meet the criteria that we set. So that is an operational decision that they take going forward.
Okay. Good morning. Thanks for inviting me here today. I think just make a point on the reactive potholing as well. One of the reasons we sometimes need to do a temporary repair is because we simply can't get out there to put the traffic management out and traffic lights, because it's too busy with the traffic. So we just need to make it safe as an interim measure. With the planned preventative programme, this is really important, because what it's doing, it's giving an opportunity to act before the road deteriorates to a potholed state. So we're looking to intervene early, so we prevent the road getting to the point where it's potholed, which is probably about the worst place you can get to a road, because once it becomes potholed, it does deteriorate rapidly. And with the best will in the world, a pothole repair is never going to last as long as a larger, more traditional repair like patching or machine lay. So probably half of the work we do on this programme is machine laid surfacing and hand laid surfacing. There are some more innovative solutions around thermal patching where we can warm up the carriageway and rework it so that you can create a repair that isn't a separate piece of carriageway, it's not a pothole. And in any repair, the weakness is the joint around it, so we can actually create a homogeneous treatment which doesn't have a joint around it. And another benefit is that you don't have any waste, so we're not cutting out, taking material away. The areas we work on, the roads we work on, are identified by the inspectors and the local highway officers. And one of the benefits of this programme is that it tends to get targeted on the local roads where there's a real impact to residents and road users. The nature of the repairs really, and it lends itself to the local roads. And I think there is a benefit there that people do see the advantages that we don't get the pothole problems on those roads. That's not to say we don't get a lot of potholes, because we do, but I certainly think there's a benefit there. I think the benefit from this early intervention is you do prolong your asset, you do prolong the road. Once it gets to a pothole state, it is difficult to maintain it in the long term. It is giving a better perception, and we're mitigating the claims. But really, it's a more durable long-term repair, and much better to intervene early than get to the point where it's potholed. So this is an important bit of what we do, I think. It's good to be able to do it.
So moving on then, we also thought it would just be useful to show you, or remind some of you perhaps, that we operate out of 4 depots. The Surrey staff really are only based at 3 of those, but we need that resilience across the county, particularly for our winter gritting service, so salt barns, etc., and where our routes may start and finish from. The other thing I'd probably like to point out is that obviously the key large functions are happening out of Merrow Depot and Godstone Depot particularly, where we have the safety defect team operating out of Godstone and more of the planned works operating out of Merrow. And that co-location with Keir and Surrey staff means that actually they can resolve problems earlier, if you like, and work together in delivering some of this stuff. That's proved quite valuable to the service. So, if we can move on to the next slide. Paul's going to talk to you about some performance.
Thank you. Excuse me. If you can move on, Richard, thank you. So I'm going to talk about performance in general terms rather than specific measures. And
can I suggest, Colin, we're going through a process of death by PowerPoint here. I know it's very important, but it would have actually been useful if we'd have had the slide material beforehand, because then we could have cut down a lot of your time in presenting it, and the members could actually have asked questions. But Paul.
Thank you. We've got 22 key performance indicators which we measure and report each month across a number of different areas. And this is just an example of the live dashboard that we use to measure performance each month. So you can't see the detail on this, but on the slides it will show whether it's been audited by the council officers, whether it's an agreed final figure or it's still in its provisional state. And you can see on that example there's a couple of ambers and a couple of reds. That will then lead us into improvement actions and to start to investigate what's going wrong and what we can do to improve that. So the way that this is split up, there's some grey boxes across the top. We have what we call scrutiny boards, and that's led by one of the senior highways officers who lead those groups to review performance each month. And they look for not only the performance that's being reported by Keir, but the work that their own officers have then done to validate and scrutinise and check that. And that will include going out on site to check that the quality of repairs has been done, checking photographs that have been taken to make sure the work has been done to the agreed standard. And then all that information is then cascaded up into a monthly report which is reviewed by the senior leadership team, and then quarterly the senior officers, which includes Bernard's managers,
and Jason will get together as a core group and look at performance as a whole across the contract, and then look at more strategic actions. If you can move on, Richard. Thank you. So they're just an example. So we've broken them down into looking at making the network safe, keeping the network in good condition, improving network availability and resident engagement. We also then bring in winter over the winter months. Obviously, we don't review those during the summer months. And as I said, performance is reported by Kier, but we then spend time each month, our officers are out checking the work to make sure that what's being presented is correct, and if appropriate, challenging them. The majority of those performance outcomes that are illustrated are actually tied directly to Kier's profit. So if their performance is higher overall, then they will get higher profit, although I will stress that's capped at 4%. But equally, if their performance dips, then the amount of profit they get paid will also drop down. So, Richard, if you can go on. So there's just a couple of examples of the kind of things that we're measuring here. So immediate response, over the last few months, 1,000 immediate response events. Of those, 96% were responded to within 2 hours. And if you look at the quality, that's measuring how well the response was. So if it's turning up to clear some fly tipping, that the fly tipping was cleared out of the way, and so on and so forth. Safety defects and both time and quality. So we've got very high performance figures in this area. It does tend to struggle a little bit more as we get into the post-winter, and this year was an unfortunate example of that with the bad weather we had. Move on one, please. This is about the planned work. So we're measuring a combination of the agreed programme dates and the work being delivered to programme, and then also, again, the quality of work completed. So we will specify either it's a very significant piece of resurfacing work and there'll be a design and measuring that, but it could be about trimming back some vegetation or realigning some curbs, and officers are out checking that that work has been completed as agreed. Move on.
I think that's £5 from the Vice Chairman to a charity.
This one is a very important one. We, as members probably know, we operate a permit scheme for all contractors and utility operators on the network when they're carrying out roadworks, and Kier, along with all the other providers, are subject to the same scrutiny on those. So we're measuring what they do. We also look at where Kier are putting out traffic management on sort of high-speed dual carriageways to make sure that where we can, we might bring a district or a borough in to do their grass cutting or to do the gully cleaning at the same time, so that we try to minimise the amount of disruption. And there's actually measures to the more that they do, the better the performance is of those kind of things. And then the final scrutiny board is around resident engagement. So we use the results from the National Highways and Transport NHT survey. We look at how customer complaints and inquiries are responded to, and if there are corrective action plans, how well they're responded to and dealt with. And also things like advance warning signs and speaking to residents and businesses before work's carried out to ensure that they know what's coming, and that there are plans in place to, whether it's let residents through if they need to get in and out of their properties during work, and so on and so forth. And where appropriate, actually attending the public events if it's a big scheme. So they're measured on all of those areas. I think Bernard's going to pick up on some of the improvements that we've made.
Yes, Kier were fortunate to secure an extension to the contract to take it through to 2021. And at the time those discussions were ongoing, there was an option for Surrey not to award that extension. It was seen that I think no one just wanted more of the same. It was an opportunity to change things, an opportunity to sort of drive some better value through the contract. So there was some interesting changes were made. One of the sort of prerequisites was to get the work done cheaper and to target a reduction in cost by 5%. Now to date we've achieved that and a bit over the top. It's sort of last measure was somewhere near 8%, so that has been achieved. Some of the big changes there are about engaging a bit more closely really with the subcontract supply chain. We worked to a new alliance contract. It's called the Framework Alliance Contract, and what that does, it sets a framework for for Surrey and Kia and the supply chain members to work closer together, to share best practice. So we get all of the supply chain together in a meeting with Kia representatives from Surrey to talk about the things that are being done well, the sort of tricks and ideas that various subcontractors have got that makes them more cost effective or efficient. And that's quite a big change, because in the old days everybody kept that to themselves. That was their bit of commercial advantage that they would keep to themselves. So we've managed to tease that out through this process. And it's pretty early days. That's only been running since April, but progress to date has been good. The engagement from the subcontractors has been good. And I think we'll see that as something that develops over time, but that will certainly drive value through the contract and improve the efficiency, improve the predictability of costs and predictability of programming. In terms of what that looks like on the ground, we've moved away from a model where Kia recovered profit and overhead and dealt with things like opportunity and risk through a percentage increase on the rates. And that was quite difficult to have visibility of what, and that's not an unusual model, that's a fairly common model across the country, but it's quite difficult to understand what contractors are getting out of that in terms of the client looking in, and for contractors quite often it's quite difficult to assess the risks. So in the new arrangement, the supply chain, we had a re-procurement exercise, so all of the supply chain members on the framework were asked to price schedules of work. So a competitive exercise was undertaken, and Surrey now pay for the work at the rate that the subcontractors charge. So it's quite visible, there's no uplift. And Kia are paid for their overhead for their people through a model that's agreed with Surrey, so we understand who's in that model and who isn't, and they're paid for effectively at cost. And the profit on the contract is a combination of the amount of work we do and the way we perform. So it's linked into the performance indicators. So it's very visible. I think the thing there, and it's interesting because it's not something that's done that much across the country. There's a very transparent, visible model, and everybody can see where the risk sits. Everybody can see what everybody's making out of it. And I think in terms of getting people to work closer together, the visibility helps that, because no one's trying to sort of hide something, I suppose. I think we moved on, yes. If we could move on one more. Thank you. In terms of sort of where we're going now, we've learned some lessons from the Horizon project. What Horizon was able to do was it was a combination of two things. So we've got an asset management strategy which gives them a clear indication of the work they need to do over the next probably 10 to 20 years, I should think. And with Horizon, there was a budget available in order to deliver that. So you need two things. You need a strategy and you need a budget, pretty much what Colin was saying. Certainly, if we were able to achieve that and have visibility of longer programmes of work, what we can do with the supply chain is we can give them the assurance around the volumes, and they're able to sort of programme it themselves and drive some cost savings through there, and also get them involved in the design. So a lot of subcontractors have got innovative materials, innovative ways of working, and we can move away from some of the traditional solutions and get better value for money by being we're working a bit more cutting edge really with some technologies and materials, and some of those benefits were realised through Horizon, and we're driving that sort of way of working into the general works programme now. So it was easier to see big gains through big surfacing contracts because there's a lot of volume going through, but that same way of working, we're getting into the local improvement schemes and traffic calming schemes and the civils work we do. And certainly I think this new arrangement we've got with the Framework Alliance is encouraging a much closer way of working between all three parties involved. And I think we'll see some real benefits come out of that.
And go on to the next slide, talks about that's gone already, that's started. Talks about the next steps. And obviously we asked about the task finish group. I take your comments on board, Chair, about the presentation, but this is a complex issue which I thought are the best way to bring through. We could have put this in a paper, you could have read in advance, it would have been really thick. And I thought the best way to bring this to you was actually bring the experts in front of you to actually explain some of the complexities of it. I know there's a lot of information here, as I apologise at the beginning. I know there's quite a few slides, and it's a lot less than where we started, but it was all relevant, and I felt it needed to be put across by the people that were involved in it. The next steps are up there on the screen, which I'm happy to live with you, and happy to take questions from there.
Can I just say that I understand there is a lot of information on these slides, but it would have been more practicable to actually have this slide presentation supplied to the members first. We could have actually asked intelligent questions about the slides, because quite a lot of the detail up there is actually beyond being able to read in any case. So listening to you read the slides out is just wasting members' time. I'm sorry, I disagree with you very strongly on that, Colin, but we're almost to the end, almost to the questions. Let's make a...
We're at the questions. If anyone wants to go back to any particular slide and ask questions on it, on any particular areas, we're happy to flick backwards and forward, or Richard is, and take it from there.
These slides sent to us after the meeting. And it's nearly a sense of saying, well, then we'll have a chance to go through it all, maybe have another meeting and we can talk sense and understand it. And unfortunately, we don't have a mechanism to do that.
I would disagree, if I may, at that, Chair, because I'm always open for members to come to me and ask questions.
It could be a solution where we actually invite Colin back, or we collect our questions and we feed them back through the Chair. But you're right, this is just... We've got an upturned funnel here, and this information is just coming down on us. We can't read it and we can't use it.
And to be honest, Chair, we're here at the next Select Committee as well to do the performance. If you want to add a bit of work to that, to absorb some of this information and bring some of that conversation to the next one, again, we're happy to come back and have that conversation then as well.
Thank you. I've got a question. We've seen the response times, and we've seen the cost of repair to roads. What we haven't seen is any measurement on the life of those repairs, because I'm very conscious of the fact that we do get a deluge of complaints from residents that we go along, we repair the road, and then within a short period of time that repair's damaged again. So I wondered if you keep a record of that. That's one question. You mentioned the new performance structure on the slides, and I'd like you to actually share those with the committee, what those performance structures are and how you actually measure them, the KPIs. So I'm sitting 2 feet away from the screen and I can't even read some of the content of this slide.
If I can do them in reverse order, and Lucy may want to come in. The performance structure, as I said at the beginning, that's coming back to the next committee, and is on your forward plan to look at in more detail and to go into that in more detail. I did say today you will get a view of that, but that will go into in more detail about the current KPI dashboard and the structure and the way we monitor the contract. On the life of the repairs, and Lucy may want to come in afterwards, all repairs are guaranteed for 2 years. As mentioned during the presentation, all repairs are logged. All repairs are photographed before and afterwards. Any defects that fail before I think it is the 2-year period, are repaired free of charge via Kia and down to their subcontractors. But Lucy may want to come. Does that sort of cover it?
I understand that it's no extra cost to Surrey, but there is an extra cost to the resident because it's disruption poor repairs actually produce. But we also have some other members that want to talk. So, Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. Colin said in his introduction that when there was a bad winter, it didn't cost Surrey any more money because Care had to bear the extra cost. And this sounds good, but I have to say I'm not necessarily impressed by that arrangement. Care are actually a very big, successful company, as far as I can see by looking up the reports. And they will have negotiated a contract with Surrey that allows for this, actually, over the projected period of the contract. And what we seem to be having here is a bet on the weather. And if the weather's bad, it costs Care money. If the weather's good, Care will benefit. And I don't actually think that's the way to do things. And it costs what it costs to maintain roads. We should be choosing a company that's the best company to do it. And maybe Care are, I've got no idea, but they probably are. And the arrangement should be that we deal with the costs in a sensible way, that we're not betting on the weather. That's just silly, because it means that you're going to build in a bigger margin against this liability than is likely to happen. And if over the 10-year period, or whatever the contract is period, it will actually finish up costing Surrey more than it should do. So I'm not really impressed by that. It sounds good, but it's not the way it should be done. The other general comment I've got, actually, is that I'm a very new member, actually, at Surrey. From my limited experience of getting involved in things where I've been involved in locally, getting quotes for things where Surrey were involved, when it comes to small things, the quotes that come forward seem to be amazingly high. And I think this is because if we're dealing with a very large organisation, it's got its own bureaucracy, and then there's subcontractors and all that sort of thing. And by the time you get down to the small local companies doing it, there's a whole load of levels of profit being added on. And I don't really know if I'm talking about Care here, but the headmaster of our local school, Sir Andrew Carter, this is an entirely different
Can we try and just keep it to a question, Andy?
Oh, sorry, Jim. I'm just trying to illustrate my question. So I guess my question is, or my recommendation is really that we think carefully about how we arrange this in the next contracts in terms of whether we should be betting on the weather or not, because I personally don't think we should. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. What I suggest is we go through the questions and then perhaps you can come back with some answers. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. And without labouring the point to Colin and the team, well, whilst the presentation is very good, we only have one committee meeting every quarter, and it's really important for us as a committee to make the maximum value of the session we have, and therefore having the slides beforehand to look through, make our own comments, would add value to this session, even though I take Colin's point that we can raise these subjects again in December. Because we only meet so infrequently, we really want to get the maximum bang for the buck that we can at every meeting that we have of the committee. So reinforce what the Chairman has just said. Coming back to the presentation itself, or the issues itself, the presentation has said all the strengths of the contract, of which there are many, and it's been revised. What many of us are interested, and it should be an internal challenge, what are the weaknesses of the current contract that maybe can be addressed in future? So, yeah, fine, if tick, 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 maybe you come back and say, actually, O'Reilly, there are no weaknesses, but I'm sure there are, and it would be quite useful, even at this early stage, to identify where in both the contractor's point of view and Surrey's point of view, where there are weaknesses in the contract. And my third point, which is related to my first point and to the second point, and I appreciate Colin absolutely right, doesn't want to talk about individual cases or potholes, etc. But we see three reds, clear reds here. Well, I'm fortunate because I can sit here and read one of them. The 29% is Surrey Residents Survey, which, no, that was a call, my call was from a local resident who was saying, what's going on here? Now, this is a serious point. It may be perception, it may be reality, but if one of the reds, deep red, is the feedback from our own residents, from their own assessment, that should be causing us as councillors some concern. I don't know what the other two are. Maybe very briefly you could explain, without getting into two levels of detail, what the other two big reds are that we should be worried about, but it all focuses into what are the weaknesses of the present arrangements that we hope to improve with the new contract starting in 2021.
And do you want to answer those? Because there's quite a few questions there.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start from the top. I mean, a good point made about the value for money of the pothole, the safety defect service. I think when we first let this contract, it was on a risk transfer basis, so lump sum, and at the time that was considered to be a significant benefit to the authority because we were experiencing deterioration on our network and these potholes are an issue for us. So that was considered at that time a cost-effective way of transferring our risk, so we could manage that with the budgets going forward. But I take your point, and over the time we have reviewed it and considered whether it needs changing and whether it's reflecting reality, and certainly we've had extra investment in our network, so we have reviewed it and seen how we could operate it differently. So we are not blind to those facts about whether it's offering us value for money, and certainly as part of the new contract, as you've identified, we need to consider whether that lump sum arrangement is the best way forward or if there is indeed a different way of doing it. So I completely agree with what you're saying there. On the kind of perceived value for money, I suppose, for minor works, part of the reason, I suppose, why we did the supply chain review is because we were trying to answer that question as well, get some clarity about what the supply chain costs were, what key costs were, and whether that was giving us a good rate. Obviously, all of our procurement of the original contract and that process went through procurement processes, so we are undertaking the processes which should guarantee us a value for money exercise, but I can understand that for certain items there is a question about whether there's value again. So again, considering what works we might be doing in a new contract, that's a very important question for us to make sure we are testing that value. On the strengths and the weaknesses, I suppose what we've tried to demonstrate is that was a weakness, I suppose, we've just described about where we're getting value for money on our rate. So we've tried to address that through the improvement actions we've taken, the re-procurement. I think at the moment as we are looking at our contract and what happens next, we're all looking at weaknesses. So we can actually bring some of that back to the December meeting perhaps. I think it varies on who you are, so there'll be some views on frontline delivery, which will be different perhaps to residents. So we need to collect all of those. So I wouldn't want to kind of list lots more right now, but I appreciate absolutely we do need to identify that so we can address going forward. The reds on the dashboard, what we wanted to do here is be very open with you to show, look, we're doing live performance monitoring, we're not ignoring this, we are going to have red. If that all showed green, I think you would say we don't believe you. So we've tried to be honest here and say this is what it looks like at the moment. It changes. The point of having those reds and the scrutiny board system that we have in place is that we have lots of opportunities and escalation to identify where we aren't performing as we would like, and then improvement plans are put in place to deal with it. The other two reds, one of them is about our permitting system, our coordination. So we say that that's very important to us because we know congestion is a problem in Surrey. We expect our contractor to comply with our permit scheme. So any scheme, and that's only one out of probably about 700 schemes that took place in that month, didn't have a permit. So we automatically turn it red if they haven't done it at once. The resident survey, as you pointed out, we know we have issues in getting a good response back from residents when we survey them after works in terms of giving us information back about how they think it went well or didn't go well. We always hear more about how it didn't go well, but what we are looking at there then is understanding why that is, how we can get more feedback, or whether there's something else going on there. Again, it forms part of some of the improvement works that take place from the scrutiny boards. The one at the top right, Paul, I don't know what that is.
So that's about jobs that were completed against the agreed programme dates. So one of the things that Lucy said and I mentioned earlier on is about it being a live dashboard. So if you can see the little bit of white writing on the bottom right of that square, it says provisional. So that is being discussed today, and I believe there's 11 jobs out of, so I'm just looking at the live dashboard as we're talking. There's 11 jobs out of 79 that didn't meet the timescales that were originally agreed. That might be they were a day over. There may be legitimate reasons for that. So it may be that there was a change in the scope of work on site. The scrutiny board will be discussing that. I think they're meeting as we speak, actually. So that's why that's saying provisional. But what it does do is we'll look at those 11 failures in that room and find out what happened and what can be done better. So if you take the permit example, I've just looked at the notes on the permit. It led to a review of what constitutes when a permit's required because there was some confusion. So it's about continuous improvement, and an amber or red indicator for us is as important as a green one because it actually allows us to tackle things and make things better. So hopefully that answers those points.
If I can just come back on that particular permit subject, I think probably a lot of people would like to see on that permit system a fine or a charge for overrun against the time when that permit should run out, because we see considerable congestion on the roads, and there doesn't seem to be any method of punishment or controlling that. So I'm sure you've got that in hand. If you haven't, could you look into that? And we have still 3 more members queuing up to ask questions.
Yeah, can I come back on 2 little points? Because I think, value for contract that Andy mentioned, it's a final risk. If you get someone to paint your lounge, do you have a day rate or do you have a fixed rate for the job? And that's part of the challenge we had in doing the contract. Whether it's right or wrong, as Lucy said, happy to look at that. Weakness of the contract, John, I think amount of money available that doesn't meet, and the job that doesn't meet a resident's expectations, I think is absolutely the biggest weakness in the contract. How we fix that, I don't know. You can't put more money into it. How do you get more out for your penny? Perhaps we can. But I think the biggest weakness for me and what I've seen is actually it doesn't meet the residents' expectations. It's an amount of money spent to actually meet our criteria that we have to meet on the highway. The permits one, local committee in Elmbridge have already had it, and the permits, the street works team are happy to come and talk to local committees about individual areas, and as John will tell you, that they've already been there and done a big explanation. What's come out of that is a Q&A on that, which we're going to circulate to all members once that's been finalised.
Okay. Well, I actually would like to see another slide in here when you send these to us. I'd actually like, if we're talking about a contract performance review, I'd actually like to see the terms of the present contract, the terms against the terms of the proposed contract, and also a benchmark of between that contract and maybe 1 or 2 other similar sized councils, so we can actually see what you're proposing, because at the moment we're looking at issues in isolation. We're not looking holistically at some of these contract points.
We'll work with you outside the meeting on bringing some of that information, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. One area you didn't cover in the presentation, which I think is quite an important area and something that I talk to Colin about a lot, is around communications. Because I'm not entirely sure who the work communications team work for. Is it Kia? It's the council. Okay, so there's clearly a breakdown in communication between your contractors, Kia, and our team. And the chairman mentioned disruption earlier on. The Kia contract is with us, but our contract, you could say, is with residents. And the Vice Chair mentioned weaknesses and resident perception. And it's important that we keep disruption to a minimum, because that 29% in the red there, I would hazard a guess that a lot of that dissatisfaction is around disruption. And there's a lot we can do to mitigate that with effective communications. And my personal view is that and it's not just, by the way, it's not just with highways. I think as an organisation, our comms are bad right across the board. But highways is clearly a very resident-facing service, something that touches pretty much every resident you speak to in one way or another. Even if they don't drive, one way or another, they come into contact with the highway. And you only got to look at the communication that we get as councillors from the Works Communications team. Incredibly confusing. A lot of it actually unnecessary. A lot of it technical, legal stuff that residents are not interested in. All they want to know is, when is the road going to be closed? When is it going to disrupt them in the shortest amount of information possible? And another area where we fall down is where we get a communication that there's going to be some work done, and for whatever reason, whether it's weather, knock-on effects or whatever, that work doesn't get done, and that isn't communicated. There's no follow-up communication. And
Can we have a question?
The question is, what are you going to do to address that?
Oh, they're all right in. I'll cut straight in. I think communication has been a big thing that I've worked on over the last 12 months, and hopefully many of you will know that. It has got better, but it is still a long way from being perfect. The team are working really hard within the restraints they've got, getting all them communications together. But I think actually, to make it simple, you've got a forward work programme. I think they're happy to bring that back as a separate item to look at all the different information, how we communicate it, what's the best way of communicating it, look at the documents that go out, what is the legal jargon that we do need to do, because there will be some, but actually what bit of it's relevant and what's not, and what let the committee make some recommendations on the way forward.
Peter.
Thank you. I've got, I think, 4 or 5 questions. If I start off while this slide is up on there, you've spoken about the scrutiny boards looking at the KPIs and delving into where the issues are. Can I ask who's on the scrutiny boards? Because it doesn't, I don't know, but it doesn't feel right if officers are actually scrutinising their own work. I'd question whether that was a sensible approach. That's my first question. My second question is, right on your very first slide, you showed, I think, at the very start of this contract, that I think the expectation was, I think it was at 10 to 12 million that the contract was going to be, and it's now 45 million, I think, from what you said. 35 to 40 million, sorry. And my question is, do you actually have a factor analysis of kind of what's changed from our assumption back when we started the contract to what it is now? As far as I can see, it can be changes in scope, it can be changes in the activities that we do, or it can be changes in the cost of each activity. But I think it would be really insightful to tell us kind of what the underlying factors are for that change. Third question is, I think in your part of the presentation you were talking about the fact that we, when work is done, we go out and check the work so that we can rate it. My question is, what percentage of work do we actually check? Do we check 100% or do we check a cross-section of it? Okay, I mean, I'm new to this, so I'm sorry if I'm asking obvious questions, but I think that's my role. And finally, when you said that Surrey County Council pay the actual price now provided by the individual contractor rather than the average price, I guess my question there is, how does Surrey know that it's actually paying a reasonable price? Are we involved in that process? But if you're doing the contracting and Surrey are paying for it, it may be that we're not completely aligned. In my experience, these kind of contracts always work best if both the contractor and the procurer's interests are always aligned. So what's good for one is good for the other. And where they break down is where actually those two diverge. And then my final question, I'm sorry I've got so many, is right back on the material we provided before to have a look through, where you were talking about sort of the things that coming up for the contract review, what are the kind of things that we want to be looking at. I just reinforce the chairman's comments to say I think what I would like to see is benchmark the contract that we have with other contracts that other counties have that are analogous to ours. I have the levels of traffic that we have and maybe similar kind of weather conditions that we have. And not only compare the contractual basis? In other words, what are the drivers and how is it put together? But also look at the cost of specific pieces of work, because that's the bit where sometimes I get concerned. How much does it cost to, I don't know, build a pedestrian crossing? How much does it cost to resurface 100 metres of road? Because I'm a pretty simple man, and quite often if you reduce things down to individual items, it's easier to make the comparisons. So those are my questions.
Thank you for your short resume there. We've got 2 more questions after this. Do you want to deal with those 5?
Okay, I'll start and pass the colleagues. So the scrutiny boards are chaired by Surrey County Council managers, and it's escalated. So it kind of filters through the tiers of our service, if you like. It is both Surrey and Keir who sit on those scrutiny boards, so there's a challenge there. What we've done previously in previous select committee formats is we've brought the performance here on a more regular basis for further scrutiny. So I think, and that's what's on the original agenda for December. So I'm very happy that the performance is brought here for scrutiny. It's very operational at the scrutiny boards, as you would appreciate. So I would question that that's the right place for anybody else to be involved. But certainly we would appreciate some scrutiny. And as I said previously, we've fetched it here, and that's the plan to do that if that's acceptable to the committee chairman. In terms of turnover, there was various things in this really. The activities have changed. We have changed some of the scope, and that was dealt with as part of some of the extensions and some of the big projects of work that we introduced. So the Horizon project, for example, which would also brought extra budget, was something that we expanded our current contract on. So it's not just been a question of adding more money because it's costing us more money. We've actually been delivering more activities and more work. Okay, yep, certainly. I'm going to pass to Paul to talk about what percentage of work.
Okay, so the high volume activities like safety defects, immediate response, they're checked, around about 5% of those are checked by us, but Keir check them first. They have a control hub that works 24/7, so overnight a lot of that work is going through checking, and because the operatives have devices with cameras on, and the process drives them to take a photo at the beginning before they start, photo at the end to show what they've done. They're checking that. We then do a completely random
Paul, can we do questions and comments through the chair, please?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So if I stop you there, and because we're well running over here and we want to try and make this as effective as we can. Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think the concern I have is very much the concern that you've expressed, that we've had some information presented to us today, and it's the first time in probably a year that we've had, as a scrutiny committee, any opportunity to look at the way in which the contract operates. And it's clearly important from the scrutiny point of view that we get the opportunity of doing that more regularly and on a sensible basis where we have information in time to consider it. I was a member of the task group that looked at the extension of the contract a couple of years ago, and that was a really interesting exercise because we had the opportunity of going in real depth into the contract and came out with some recommendations which the whole committee could then discuss and send forward, and I think some of those were incorporated into the extension, and I hope we can do that again in the task group that's been recommended. It needs very firm terms of reference, but it can be a very important exercise. And just to keep in the questions mode, two of the issues that came out of that were, first of all, the performance of subcontractors, and secondly, the question that's already been raised about how Keir handle small issues like signs and white lining and things of that sort. And to me, the problems that were raised at that stage still exist and are still around. And the question is, how do you tackle those? How do you ensure that some action is taken to make sure that the performance of contractors is improved and the issue of small items is dealt with effectively?
And Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, virtually all the questions have been asked already, so I just have one and final one, and this is actually to Bernard. And the question I want to ask you, in your opinion, our roads and infrastructure is an asset that we have. So therefore, in your opinion, are we maintaining the asset? Are we improving it? Or actually, is it deteriorating?
That's a good question. I think Surrey aren't in a different place than any other authority in the country. And the current situation is a product of years, many years of reducing budgets and of using available spend. So I think the place we would all like to be is that we were spending more on the asset, and there would be some long-term gains from that in terms of it's like any asset. If you maintain it at the correct time and intervene at the correct time, you'll prolong the life. There's recently been a large investment through the Horizon programme into Surrey, and the benefits from that will be realised for some years to come, but we're now heading into a period of reduced spend, albeit there's been some increased money this year as a result of the winter, but that's sort of really treading water. That's as a reaction to what happened through the winter. And the reality is that Surrey are heading into a period of what would be called managed deterioration. So it's deteriorating, but in a visible and if I could use the word, maybe a scientific way. So there's a lot of measures around asset management techniques that will show that for a particular amount of investment you can prolong the life of the carriageway for a period of time, and you can wait for your road to deteriorate to a point where you've effectively got to replace it, and there's a massive capital investment to get back to the place you want to be, or you can intervene along the way and spend less capital money, but you do it in small amounts. As I say, we've just gone through a period where a big investment was made, and there will be some benefits for that for some time to come. But I think I would say that large investment was made at a point where the condition of the network had deteriorated to a point where it needed to be brought back up. So it is it's like a series of waves. But simple answer to your question is we're heading into a period of managed deterioration, but shouldn't see any sort of that's not something to necessarily fear because it's being managed. But it's managed around budgets that are available. Everybody's doing that now.
So do I understand you then that the Surrey roads that we have, based on the spend that we are spending, are acceptably deteriorating? Is that what we're saying?
Surrey's roads compare favourably with others, and there is work done in terms of how does Surrey maintain their roads compared to other authorities. But over a period of time, if we go on,
just a second. Can we actually see that information then? Because
yes,
you're quoting benchmarking,
yeah.
and I think this committee would like to see those comparisons and those cost analyses.
Happy to share that, Chair, but may I also say that every speech I've done at local committees and in council, my first line always says, we are managing a deteriorating network. Well, I always start with my conversation with, because it's a fact. You know, if I look at the money that we get from local government, I know these conversations have gone on, the 19 or nearly 20 million we get to actually to manage the network at an even level would take 24 to 25 million, and actually until we get up to 27, 28, we would start to make very small improvements. But I've mentioned that on quite a few occasions on my talks around local committees.
Thank you, Colin. No one's disputing that. It's helpful to have that. But just Bernard's commitment, which is really important, the collective commitment, the information that the condition of Surrey highways is, I think, to use a phrase, your phrase, is better than many, or better than average. I don't know what the phrase is. We'd like to see that, and that's a really important piece of information if it is indeed available.
Lucy.
If I may, yes. We have some national statistics which are held on the government website, so that information is available. We can show it in a map form. What that information will show you is how we compare across others, so you can see it regionally across the council. That's very available. We can share that link with you as part of the circulation of the slides.
Okay. It doesn't paint a very good picture, and I know Colin's mentioned it at local committee meetings, but we're here as representatives of the residents, and they see their rates paying for this investment, and it's not a very good return. So I think if I went out knocking on the doors of canvassing for votes and said that we have a depreciation asset and we're spending all this money and it's still going down, we wouldn't get very many votes. So I'm very concerned about that. More importantly, I've got no benchmark to actually compare it against. So we've got a set of slides which we want, and we want more detail on it. We actually want to see some very accurate benchmarking against other organisations. And also, to drill down to some detail, let's take some specifics on some sizable repairs that other counties are undertaking and seeing if we're getting value for money. It's just, I mean, we started off as a contract review, and we really haven't even got into that because we can't compare the contracts. And we can't see any improvements on the contract review because we've got no direct comparison. So I'm sorry, our recommendations won't be very pleasant in a few moments. But I suggest we have a 10-minute break so we can actually sum up on this, please. And now it's reiterating something I said earlier on, but I think we could have actually achieved many more questions and much more value from this meeting had we had the slides beforehand, and had we seen the opportunity of seeing what you're going to present today, particularly on that KPI sheet. But there are the 3 recommendations that we have. What we're trying to achieve is a good, strong benchmarking and value for money for Surrey County Council. Peter.
2 quick points. I think, and maybe it's covered in there, but I think it'd be worth spelling out. I think we want to see the dashboard. We want to actually see the performance.
You're right. That dashboard is important. We have transparency of all the content of that dashboard.
There's also, I think, let's have a look here.
If I may, Chair, one thing that was mentioned over here in a question, which I think is missing, is bringing you a comparison of a job-for-job cost, or a couple of job-for-job costs would be a good thing to do
We're
as
trying
well.
to get that
but
in the
perhaps that's wrapped up into
value
as well.
for money.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
I think on that point too, we actually want to see some direct comparison so we can maybe out of a shopping basket take some direct.
Yeah, it's quite a. I mean, I've asked this question myself and been around other local authorities and asked the question. The problem is every local authority does it differently. Some have hundreds of different contracts. Some have one contract. Some have somewhere in between, which is where we are. So getting comparisons is quite hard work. I have tried to do some work on this, but we'll do our best to bring you what we can and see what comparisons we can find from other local authorities, by all means.
The other thing that's not up there, and is something I've asked our supporting officer, and I will discuss with you, I'm concerned frankly, about the scrutiny board is like asking a policeman to manage a policeman. And I'm concerned that there's no... I know we're not supposed to drill down to operational issues as members, but I'm just concerned about the scrutiny being undertaken by that board.
I think you're right to be, and I think Lucy did come some way to addressing that I think operational scrutiny needs to be done operationally, but actually there's no reason why on a regular basis some of that shouldn't come back to this committee to highlight some areas that have come up red and what's been done and the work that's been doing going forward to bring those to you at the periodic times. I think is actually part of the forward work programme as well.
And I think our leader's going to give me some advice. David, there's one that works here.
Chairman, I've sat here for the last hour. I have to say I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed by anything I've heard from anybody. I'm not impressed with the fact that you've had slides presented to you at the meeting, because I tried to find the slides sitting down and I can't find them. I'm not impressed with the recommendations, because I don't think that is possible, a lot of it. I'm not impressed when people tell me that you cannot do a deep dive into operational things. Scrutiny is the role of this committee. This committee has the authority, in my view, in accordance with our constitution, to scrutinise anything it likes. It should not be dictated to by a cabinet member or by me. It's not our job. Our job is to answer the questions you as the scrutiny committee ask of us. Now, I have chaired this committee in the past, Chairman, yeah, and I have to say to you that when I had the previous chairman with me at the time, we went off and we scrutinised stuff, we did deep dives, and we found things that were not right. And the old contractors, probably Lucy was around at the time, when we had Carillion and Ringway. I have to say, Chairman, as a result of those deep dives, I managed to get the council 1 million back from each of those two contractors, correct? And I don't know why you cannot go and check some of these things. You can go in, you can ask it, you can trace it. What you should be able to do is trace when an order is raised for an item, for a piece of work, and trace it through the system and see where it comes out as the cost. Because that's what I did with the previous chairman, and we were able then to establish that a lot of this wasn't happening. My advice to you is get on and scrutinise.
Thank you for your input. We still believe our recommendations stand, but I agree with you that we should have the right to look at the scrutiny, and we will take that up with a cabinet member outside this meeting. And
I'd like to apologise to the chair if that's the indication I've given that you can't do it, because that's not my intention and not what I thought I said. So I apologise.
Yeah, and you didn't,
if that's what
you didn't, but the officers did say that the officers, we've been advised that we cannot scrutinise the board, but we will. So.
Mr. Chairman, can I just suggest that the Task and Finish group, as we're going to set that up, could move rapidly and look at a deep dive or something like that, kind of so that we're ready for the next committee meeting and we're moving, because the problem that we have is that time just runs out, and we're halfway through this year as it is. And if we're going to do some work on this, maybe this task group could start it.
Yep, it's a point, and I'll be asking for volunteers to join that task group, which will be chaired by the Vice Chairman. So,
Richard,
yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And we will now move on to the full work programme.
Formally agree the recommendations, notwithstanding the very helpful input from the Leader of the Council. I certainly support the recommendations.
Are the members of the committee happy with those recommendations? Those recommendations are then carried and will be put into the minute. Right, everyone would have seen the full work programme that was supplied previously. One of the main items which will come back to us in December is the Highways Improvement Contract Review, which I hope that we'll have more in-depth information by then. We will also take the affordable housing and early and mid-1919 LEP's involvement. Are everyone happy with the full work programme? Can you see anything that we've missed? I think it's useful the air quality will be having a joint involvement with the Environment and Infrastructure Select Committee. Any comments on the full work programme? Peter?
My only thought is that on the air one and also affordable housing and things is how we bring the boroughs into our scrutiny, because they are so heavily involved in those areas. Just to, I throw that out as a thought that I think we need to look at.
Yeah, a number of our borough colleagues will actually be invited along to that meeting, because we're looking at opportunities, particularly joint venture opportunities, where we can get them involved, particularly in the housing element. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. There were two items that I didn't see on this list that I remember when we had that meeting of our committee to talk about things we'd like to scrutinise. And one that I think would be really helpful is looking at reappraising some of the investments that we have made. I feel passionately about this because the corporation I work for used to do this very rigorously, and it was an important part of the capital programme was to go back and look at the assumptions that have been made on a project that's been up and running for a couple of years, so it's all settled down. What assumptions did you make when you made the investment decision, and what actually happened 2 years later after that investment is up and running? And I think that would be a really useful thing to do, because we have been investing quite a lot of money. We were hoping to continue to invest a lot of money. I don't know if that's going to be the case going forward, but I think it's really important to question the validity of the assumptions, and the only way you can do that is by looking at what actually happened versus what you said. So, a plea from me, if we can look at that. It doesn't need to be in our next meeting or two, but that's something I would be interested in seeing. The second item, and John O'Reilly will be familiar with this, we had a very active discussion at our local committee, informal local committee recently, and it came up in the discussion just now, on the whole process behind permitting, particularly with the utility companies. And I heard the comment being made earlier on. Certainly in my division, it's been an absolute nightmare for months now, with multiple pieces of work going on for extended period of time, causing absolute gridlock and chaos. And I think that's an area which I think could do with a good prod as well.
I think you're right. Relationship between utility companies and us is something that we need to be looking at. But more importantly, I think that the future items in development, which is what you were talking about, the return on investment, capital employed, and looking at projects, is something that I really want to drill down to. I think it's the first opportunity as we as a committee or as a scrutiny committee will have, and I want to bring that forward rather than leave it to BC. I also want to, something that I'm very conscious of, that we are looking into something that there doesn't appear to be a benchmark. And I'm when I've run businesses before, you're looking at return on investment, return on capital employed, and you normally have a benchmark to go against, and I think we need to establish one, because whether we're getting a return on that money invested, and if not, then should we be divesting it and reinvesting in something where we are going to get a better return? So it's something that we are going to try and get some more flesh on the bones and get it quickly onto the agenda. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a very last one, particularly on the growth agenda, because a lot of the districts and boroughs are completing their local plans as we speak. It's whether actually the County Council is tied up into delivering that growth that they are planning for, because they do rely very much on our services, particularly for infrastructure and highways. So whilst it may not seem that they are joined up, it would be useful maybe to have a look at are we promoting the growth that they are planning on delivering.
Thank you, Chairman. Again on growth, which ties into quite a lot of the things on the forward plan here, is broadband and 5G. And broadband and 5G, looking at things like with affordable housing, for instance, that there's fibre to the door. And is there anything we can do as a council to help facilitate that? Working with the boroughs and districts, I suppose, and their regulatory committees. And it ties in with everything else. Pretty much everything we see here on the forward plan, broadband and 5G plays a part in some way. And, we're talking in our 2030 vision about becoming hopefully, a benchmark in digital, a digital council. All 5G and broadband fits into all of these things, and I'm conscious that we try to make sure that we're doing our best to facilitate that.
I was of the understanding that well, we've obviously got broadband as one project, and I understand that there is a rollout of fibre to fibre. So the fibre optic stuff is being developed by the team that interfaces with OpenReach, I understand. So that concludes the formal part of the meeting.
Chair, if I may, just on you'd mentioned about streetworks, and I think that's really important to actually bring, but actually as part of that, also an update on lane rental, which is in the public domain at the moment. Yes. It's not been finalised yet, but to give you we're actually putting in that Surrey should be part of it, but to give you an understanding of the pitfalls, because there are some pitfalls around it, but to understand the proposals on the table and to help us shape what we look at, because it's going to be a negotiation going forward. We've said we put in a submission of interest, but actually what the government come back and say we can actually do with it, I think will be really interesting. And actually there's part of it, if they come back and say some things, we might actually say we don't want to do it, because actually it could cost us a lot of money. So I think your understanding of that would be really useful as well. So add it to the streetworks one.
I think it's not only the investment, it's the political fallout as well with the residents. So we have to measure up the advantages to the disadvantages.
And part of the downside to it, you get a lot of money in from the and just to give you a bit of a brief, you get a lot of money in from the utility companies when they work on the major road network, and it's only 5% of our network. Number one, the utility companies have to sit on the board to decide how to spend that money. And number two, all of our capital projects on them same roads, we have to pay the same huge amounts of money. So there's some negatives and positives in there that we really need to understand, and we've got no definitive word from the government exactly what it's going to look like.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next meeting is on the 6th of December, but before you all dash off, I want to spend some time, because we've got the opportunity of discussing a few items which will be in private. So we close the meeting now if we can.